Thank you for joining us here once again on NCN, whether on television or radio, wherever you are viewing this program, as we continue our discussion on the Amaila Falls Hydro Project and how it will benefit all Guyanese. On this edition of this program, I will be joined by financial analyst, that is Mr. Joel Bhagwandin. He's no stranger here to NCN. Thank you so much for being here with us, Joel.
Thank you, Travis, for having me.
All right, so let's get right into it. My first question to you at this time, I want to ask you specifically your initial thoughts on the project. Of course, we have seen a little lull in some years. It's nothing new to Guyanese, but what are your thoughts from that financial perspective? Where's Guyana headed really under this project?
Well, the project was long overdue. It's not an overnight project. Um, it was conceptualized by this government since way back in the 90s in the National Development Strategy. Um, the challenges of the political economy would have um, inhibited the implementation of that project and many other developmental projects. Fast forward to where we are today, it's a good thing for many reasons that we are pushing ahead with this project. What does it mean in several contexts? The overall objective is we know it's going to reduce energy cost. Right now, our energy cost um, averages about 27 cents a kilowatt. The regional average in the Caribbean is about 33 cents. In Suriname is about 8 cents, 8 US cents a kilowatt. With this project, based on what I saw was published, based on the agreement with the company that was awarded this project, is it's gonna result in a 8 cents reduction to 8 cents. That's about 70% reduction in overall energy cost. Comparing our energy cost with Trinidad, for example, Trinidad is about 4 cents, but in Trinidad, energy is heavily subsidized, right? In the US, it's about 13 cents, right? Now, the other thing I noticed in when I read the article or the press statement was that energy was projected to grow to about 450 kilowatt by 2025. Right now, our installed capacity is about 165. At peak point in 2020, our consumption was about 30, right? So, right, it was about 130 megawatts. So that gives you a spare capacity of about 35 megawatt hour, right? So generally, the project is good. It's going to reduce energy cost. And in terms of if I'm to preempt you and speak about what will drive this demand that we are there are several notions out there in the public which states, for example, that are going around the place. You know, we're going with hydro, then we're going with natural gas. Will we have the domestic? Will this be in excess of the domestic consumption, the domestic demand? Um, there was a notion as well propagated by one particular media house where we saw that the government is seeking some assistance from Ghana in several aspects in the energy sector. One of it is to help with the natural gas project. And one of the views was that Ghana ended up in some problems where Ghana now has an excess supply problem, resulting in some financial losses for that entity. But in the case of Guyana, we gotta understand the development trajectory of the country, what that development trajectory would mean, what does it translate to, and how does that drive our demand. And based on some numbers that I use using the average growth of the 450 it works out to about 16% annual growth, right? So by 2030, 2040, which is 20 years from now, we would actually have a shortfall of about 2,600 megawatt. By 2030, we would have a shortfall of about close to 300 megawatt hour. That is even with natural gas coming in stream and with hydro coming in stream. So even with these projects online, based on where the forecast growth of energy consumption is projected over the next 10, 20 years, we're still going to have a shortfall, and we're going to need additional projects like those to meet that demand. And then, so let's talk now about what would drive that growth. What would drive the growth is largely what is happening in the oil and gas sector. In the case of Ghana, for example, Ghana is producing right now less than 100,000 barrels per day. We have just started, and we started with more than 100,000 barrels per day. Next year, when the other FPSO come on stream, we're going to be producing more than 300,000. Our projection is going to reach anywhere around a million, close to a million barrels per day in the next decade. Then we have seen that Exxon would have made announcements that it is putting things in place to move some of the services it uses in Trinidad to Guyana. That means private sector as well as government together with government support and government partnership would have to build these facilities and infrastructure to service that increased level of production. So it means you're going to have the demand is going to be driven by increased industrial activities. It's going to be driven by increased manufacturing activities. You're going to have 50,000 new households coming on stream. Now, even that 50,000, take out oil and gas from the equation. The last time I checked, housing had about 60,000 applications, backlog applications, right? So that is 10,000 short of the 50,000 target for the next 5 years. So your traditional growth, your traditional demand for housing, right? Juxtapose that with demand that will be driven by oil and gas. Now you have an influx of migrants, expats. You have hotels going up. So you have these large-scale private sector development to cater for the demand because of where the economy, the development of the economy, the transformational development that is going to drive largely. Then you have, when you build new roads, cutting new 4-lane roads, you're opening new lands for development in industrial, commercial. So think of in the oil and gas and in your normal development in infrastructure, fabrication, welding, those are things that consume heavy, large amount of energy, the manufacturing sector. And so those are the examples of what the demand assumptions for those forecasts. When I'm saying that by 2040 we're going to have a shortfall with the projects in the pipeline, with our current production, GPL's current production capacity, by 2040 we still have a shortfall of over 2,000, right? Then another dimension to it, as the economy grows, as your production output increases, it means you have increased level of investments. Increased level investments means you're creating employment. Think about the construction boom, you're creating employment. So spending power of people increasing. People having greater access to education. If, for example, the policy agenda of the policymaker to deliver on free tertiary education by 2025, that means people gonna have more access to education, right? So more people becoming highly skilled. When you look at our last labor force survey, less than 5% of the labor force are educated at a tertiary level. So free tertiary education means more of our people will become educated at a higher level. you're going to have more skills. So as people invest in their own development, invest in their own improving their own skill set, they're going to become more competitive in the job market. That means they're going to have greater income. And when you have a developing economy, everybody's busy. And for example, in my case, 24 hours in a day is not enough for me, right? Every day I wake up about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning to start working.
Oh.
That's how much work there is to do. So, and that is because of where the economy is heading. Every single person, every single businessman, every single professional would have more work to do. More work means you're burning more electricity. More work means you're earning more, so you're spending more. As the energy costs go down, you're going to invest in more modern electrical appliances. You're going to have install, instead of using fans, you're going to have more AC. And if you're working more hours, you're burning more electricity, then, and you have more, you have more money in your pocket, you have more things to do, more places to go. If you have more places to go, you're going to use the iron more. You're going to consume more food, you're going to use the microwave more. So all these things together, what is going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years, that is what is going to drive that demand, those numbers. So I took the time to explain this, to understand these are not just demand forecasts that were plucked out of the sky, right? So I'll pause here for now and give you an opportunity to ask the question.
No, I really enjoyed that discussion there, linking everything and showing exactly how persons will be able to benefit, even at the consumer level. But I wanted to talk a little, you mentioned or alluded to a little earlier about under region, about what the cost of energy is like in Trinidad, in Suriname, etc. Can we safely say also, in terms of the private sector, how they are set to benefit? Could we say that this is an evolving of the private sector? And I want to ask you, what is it like for the private sector in those other countries? Have they evolved to a point where they are now self-sufficient and they're able to turn a profit easily because of these low energy costs? Is Guyana headed there?
Well, let me take the last question first, where you ask, what does low energy costs mean for the other countries? Simple answer. We are producing plantain, right? Cassava, ground provision, right? Yet we import packaged plantain from Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what it means, right? It's as simple as that. Lower energy cost means improved national competitiveness. When we speak of manufacture, when we speak of economic transfer, now let me explain this. What economic transformation really means. Economic transformation means, in elementary economics, you will learn that there are 3 sectors of the economy, right? There is the primary sector, there is the secondary sector, and there's the tertiary sector, right? Productive sectors, that is. So an example of a primary sector activity is where you are producing the raw material, for example. So the company in mining, operating in the bauxite industry, extracting the bauxite, that company that does that aspect, that's an example of a primary sector activity. The company that has the forestry concession and fell the trees, the timber, the logging does in the primary. When that product moves through in the case of the timber to be converted to lumber, right? The lumber yards, those guys, those sawmilling businesses, they're in the secondary. They now convert this to something else that could be used to now build a house, build these beautiful pieces of furniture that we have. That's a value-added product. The same thing with bauxite. We don't have an aluminum plant because of the cost of energy. So we export bauxite and we import things like phones and stuff that is made out of the product. So essentially, economic transformation means transforming from a largely primary sector driven economy. Our economy can be described as largely primary sector driven. We produce raw materials, we're producing crude, but we're not refining it, we're not getting the value add, right? So we still have to sell the crude and we still have to import the fuel, the lubricant, and all the other things that we use to generate energy and everything else that we need fuel for. So transformation means moving from primary producing economy to secondary and tertiary producing economy, where the value add is. So that means more manufacturing, that means refineries, that means that is what it means. That's how our neighbors like Trinidad has benefited, right? So that's where we want to go. That's where the private sector would be positioned to go. Now, if I'm to give you some analysis, right? Now, we have a lot of our companies are family-owned businesses, so they don't publish data. We have a handful of public companies that publishes their financial statements and so on. So for the purpose of this interview, I looked at two of our largest manufacturing companies, Banks DH and DDL, right? Banks DH is a 30 plus billion dollars company. DDL is a 20 plus billion dollars company in terms of revenue, right? The manufacturing sector guys would tell you that energy cost accounts for about 30%, in some cases 50 and 60. But for the purpose of this discussion and for simplicity, energy cost averages about 30% of the operating cost for companies in that sector. Now, when I look at the last published reports for those two companies, right? Banks DIH, for example, their operating cost was $13 billion. So if we take 30% of that to arrive at your energy cost, or how much they spend on electricity, that's close to $4 billion. Now, if we're saying that with the hydro, we would be able to reduce our energy from 27 cents to 8 cents, which is about 70% reduction in energy costs. Using 70% reduction, Banks DH could save close to $3 billion a year on energy cost. The same thing for DDL. DDL energy cost, if we take the same 70% in savings, what it would mean, they would be able to save $3 billion. Now, if you take that savings and multiply it by 5 years, over the next 5 years, let's say we implement hydro today, and we're benefiting from 8 cents. It means the money that they spent for the past 20 years or however long they've been existing, right? In the next 5 years, the money they spend on energy costs in 2020, they could save close to $15 billion in 5 years, both companies. That's 30 billion between two companies alone. That 30 billion represents about 12% of manufacturing GDP, right? So GDP as a the manufacturing sector as a percentage of GDP, their share of the total GDP of the country is about 5%. Excuse me. So that manufacturing sector alone, GDP output is about close to 50 billion, 48 billion. So the savings in 5 years represent 12% of today's GDP for the manufacturing sector alone. Now let's translate what it means for the company, right? When I look at the balance sheet, right, I look at DDL's balance sheet, both companies' balance sheet, and the non-current assets for DDL in 2020 stood at $21.3 billion. So it means 15 billion, which assuming you're benefiting from the 8 cents, 15 billion over 5 years represents about 71% of their total non-current assets. Translating that further, what it means the savings in energy cost that they could benefit from as a result of reduced energy costs, they could expand their balance sheet by 70% in 5 years without borrowing from the bank. So same thing for banks, DH. So to put that differently, when in the current situation with 27 cents, you have balance sheet growth of in the lowest single digits of 3%, less than 5%, 2, 3, less than 5%. With the savings in energy costs, companies in the manufacturing sector in particular can experience growth in their balance sheet, in their assets, in double digits, 10%, 12%, 15%. What that means? It means growing a balance sheet, growing an asset means investing in another plant, for example. Investing that level of expansion means you're creating employment, creating more employment, generating more revenue, introducing a new service line. And that is what competitiveness means. You could now sell your products more competitively in the region and globally, thus increasing your productivity again. So that is what it means for the private sector. Now let's look at it nationally now. Right? I want to give you some more figures. Now GPL, if you want to know what the savings would be nationally, the easy way to do it is to look at Gpl Revenue for the year, because they're the power producing company, right? So in 2012, which is the most recent published annual report for GPL, their revenue was about $30 billion, right? So taking the same level of growth, 2012 to now is about 9 years or so, right? So taking the same level of historic growth without knowing what is the current revenue for 2012, without seeing those figures, we could safely say GPL current revenue is right now is about $55 billion, anywhere thereabout. So if we take 70% savings, remember we're reducing energy costs by 70%, so it means GPL revenue would reduce by 70%. That 70% savings over 5 years would work out to $190 billion, right? $190 billion is the equivalent of 911 US dollars. Now, if we are saying that the cost to build the hydro is 700 million, it therefore means that the savings that the country would benefit from, when I say the country in the sense, not the government as in state revenue, as in government revenue, the country as in the private sector, as in the household, they would save in 5 years 900 million, which is greater than the cost to build the hydro. So that in itself logically means this project makes sense, right? Because it is that savings. If we're saving 190 billion or 900 million US, I think that's even equivalent to the cost, the projected cost for the natural gas plant. So savings, when the private sector combined and household combined could save that amount, close to let's say 1 billion US, it means that they have $1 billion more, 1 billion US more in their pocket to spend in the economy. And at the farm level, individuals, of course, they're going to enhance their lifestyle. They're going to sell out their home and buy big and fancy homes. They would modify or modernize or enhance their personal assets, sell out the old car and buy a new car, right? They might want 2 cars. They might want a 4x4 to go into the interior, and they might want a fancy car to drive on the road, right? So that is what it means at the household level. People have more money in savings. Farmers will invest more, create more jobs, pay more taxes.
Mm-hmm. You know, we're just out of time, Joel, but I'm enjoying the conversation, breaking it down to the level that the average person can understand of what this project really means for our country. If you were to just have a phrase as we close off this program, to describe where we are headed over the next 5 years under the PPPC administration, especially with these transformational projects that are on stream? What would that phrase be?
It will be very personal. I know this is national television, but I would take the liberty. My wife might kill me for saying this, but I'll risk it nonetheless. Guyana is the place to be. My personal plan 2 years ago was to leave this country. Sponsorship to Canada or something. But looking at where the country is heading, I abandoned that and I decided this is the place to be. So I'm building a present and a future right here. So the phrase you're looking for, Guyana is the place to be.
Guyana is the place to be. Thank you so much, Joel, for stopping by to explain what this means for Guyanese. Of course, it is an exciting time to be here with all of these projects that are coming on board and the advent of the oil and gas sector. So thanks for sharing your knowledge here with us. And thank you also to you, our listeners and viewers of this program. I was your host, Travis Bruce. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.